Welcome to our first session of supported decision making, wide supported decision making. I just have some few housekeeping things here. So this training is approved for social work and rights CEUs. And I'm going to be sending out an evaluation at the end of the training. So be sure to fill out that evaluation. That's how we'll get your CEU certificate to you. You're more than welcome to ask questions during this training. Our presenters will let you know if they pause. They'll let you know when they're ready to answer your questions. You can also raise your hand. Right at the top of your screen, there's a little hand key there. You can select that to raise your hand. You can also type your questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well. If you need captions, you can go to the top of your screen. There is 3 little dots. You'll click on that and then go down to the option that says turn on live captions. And with that, I will turn it over to Vicki Suter.
Thanks, Caitlin. So, and for those of you that are seeking social work CEUs, you do have to complete that survey evaluation at the end in order to get those. We'll keep reminding you, we'll remind you at the end. And Jean has put her email address in the chat, because if you need right CEUs, she's the one. You can email her and she will do that. So I first want to say thanks so much for attending our training series. We're really excited about our efforts to bring information about supported decision making, or as Bonnie wants to start calling it, decision making, to all kinds of individuals, professional staff who work with individuals, families, advocates, individuals that just want more information about it and want to live more independent lives. I want to thank our partners as a part of this, because this is taking us some time to pull together, and we certainly don't do that alone. There's always people that help us achieve our goals, and so a big thank you to Mary from the Development Disabilities Council, who you'll hear today as one of the trainers. She was very instrumental in pulling this together. We also have another partner from Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, Kimberly Hoga, who is also helping us get the word out and making sure that it's a Tri-County metro region effort for folks to learn about supported decision making. And then lastly, this is one of OCHN's goals. It is to provide information to people about supported decision making and to bring more awareness and help increase the number of persons who might want to choose supported decision making. And I want to thank our supported decision making work group that we have through OCHN. We have 20-some individuals that are part of this. This training has come out of them. It is one of their goals to be sure that we're bringing information and tools. So this first presentation really is an overview, and then as we go on in the months, we're going to bring tools that you can actually use. So welcome to the training, and I'm so glad to be here with you. And we're going to turn it over to our trainers, and they can do introductions of themselves. Thank you.
Well, hi, everyone. I am Mary Sham-Bogard from the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council, and my role there is called Community Inclusion Coordinator, and I'm the lead staff for the council's efforts in supported decision making. And co-presenting with me today is?
I'm Bonnie Gonzalez. I'm a peer mentor and the DD Council Chair.
Right. So the first thing we're going to do today, Vicki alluded to the supported decision-making advisory group at the state level, and the advisory group in Oakland. And so the advisory group at the state level is made up of a variety of organizations from around the state, including Oakland Community Health Network. And we have done a lot of activity since 2018, including a supported decision-making summit and putting tools together that various organizations around the state can use. So one of those tools was a short video, and we're going to play that video now. It is 18 minutes long, so get out your popcorn, get comfy in your chair. I'm going to play the video, and then following that we'll have a short discussion about the video and then get into our PowerPoint. So if you can give me a moment of grace here, we're going to switch screen share here, and I will play the video. Okay. Caitlin, are you able to see the video?
No, not yet.
It's not quite up yet, but just give it a second. It might pop up there.
Okay.
Nope, still not up. I want to just try that again.
Okay, trying it again here. Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
No.
Okay. For whatever reason, let me try a different option to pull it up. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
All right, I'm going to play it. I'm going to alter the sound so that it's a little louder for everyone.
There's no question asked more often by parents of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD, than what will happen to my son or daughter when I'm gone? As students approach adulthood, families often question whether or not to pursue guardianship. This decision is made more difficult by lack of information. Supported decision-making is an approach that encourages individuals with IDD to make their own life decisions. What does supported decision-making mean to you?
Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the right, responsibility, and authority to make decisions in their lives.
It used to be that as soon as young people turned 18 in the County of Midland, they were immediately in my court asking for a guardianship. The type of guardianship that this is, it's called a plenary guardianship, and there are two aspects to it. One is personal and the other is financial.
Supported decision-making to me means being able to live my life, but also having someone that I can run things past if I need the help.
Supported decision-making starts with the person. That is, the person has control over decisions that they make. Rather than giving the authority to someone else to make a decision on a person's behalf, the person retains that authority and gets help when they need it from someone else.
It's when people with disabilities receive the support they need and want to be able to make their own decisions and communicate those decisions to others using trusted friends, family members, and professionals in their lives. But that's a technical definition. I think really supported decision-making is human decision-making. It's what you and I and everybody does every day.
We like to describe supported decision-making as anything that will assist a person with disabilities to take control of and direct important life decisions. Supported decision-making is more of an approach and a strategy for trying to figure out how to individualize a set of supports that will assist people not only to make decisions in their lives, but to become better decision makers over time as they learn to make more and more decisions.
I use different people in my circle because I got a circle of friends and people that I work with that I trust to, when I have to make a big decision, to ask them what they think I should do. And then ultimately, I'll make the final decision for myself because ultimately, it's my life and not nobody else, and I got to be able to control.
It really can work differently for different people. I've seen some supported decision-making arrangements that are very formal, where people are using a team approach for supported decision-making. I've seen others that are very individualized, where a person might have a smaller trusted network. I've seen supported decision-making arrangements where people go to certain people for certain questions, like finances, like healthcare, and go to other people for other kinds of questions, like relationships. And I think it looks very, very depending upon who the person is and what their wants and desires are.
For me, the important decisions are made. I usually go to my guardian, who is my mother, but more so since I moved out, I've really tried to make most decisions for myself and only go to them for ones that I should go to them for.
How is guardianship and supported decision-making different?
Guardianship is a legal relationship where a person is assigned by a judge to make decisions on behalf of another individual. So the difference between guardianship and supported decision-making is there's not a legal relationship established by a court. In supported decision-making, it's setting up arrangements so that the person has people involved in their life to help them make decisions. And it also means that people maintain their rights.
A guardianship is a really big deal. You take away all the freedoms of decision-making of that individual. And so I do not take that lightly. It's a big decision that a judge needs to make. So the sense of freedom that is associated without having a guardianship is important for quality of life. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. None of us want to have those kinds of strictures on our lives.
What the parent is doing is they're turning over that responsibility to the court, really. The court is now intervening between their child and themselves. I mean, that relationship now becomes altered in a way. There's no reason to go that route. And once we describe the different alternatives that are available to parents, generally they take them.
One of the things that we're finding in the research is that one of the first people who suggest guardianship to families is teachers at the IEPs when students are getting into that transition from childhood to the adulthood age. So early on, we need to make sure people understand that everyone needs support. Let's help people understand what the issues are, what the dreams are, so we can gather around and help folks achieve those. Guardianship could potentially take that all away.
What impact can guardianship have on a person with IDD?
Get up at a certain time, like 5 a.m. in the morning, you shower, eat your meals, like a regular day, but I felt no freedom.
When my mom passed away, for some reason, that family member thought that they should somehow take over guardianship of me. And just based on like how my childhood went and just how things were back then, I knew what it felt like to not have people give you choices and sort of not listen to you just because, you know, I had a disability. And I didn't want to have my choices taken away, especially since I was already living on my own and I had a job. I mean, I did have a disability and I did have disability benefits, but I was trying to make my own way. And so I didn't think that was fair, but I also knew that this person was very persuasive and could possibly make that happen. So I thought I didn't have any choice in the matter, and I felt that the only thing that I could do to protect myself from that was to run. So I left the country.
So what I see often with guardianship is that people rebel against decisions that they might have made themselves if they had been given the opportunity to make that decision themselves, right? It's when you're feeling like you're being forced to do something or someone else is in control of your life, then you begin to find other ways to have some control in your life. And sometimes those ways aren't very healthy or safe.
How does supported decision-making work in the lives of individuals?
At Quality Trust, for example, we work with both young adults who have not yet reached the age of 18, as well as people all the way through, you know, the later years. I'll start with some of the adults that we've worked with. For them, it's been a challenge because they may not have had in their early developmental years an opportunity to make decisions. And so therefore, they've already developed some preferences about which decisions they're interested in making and which decisions they're not. The other element that we often see is they may have learned some habits in life that they have to overcome in order to really become better decision makers. So they need a set of supports around them that will assist them to primarily think through what their options are and what the potential consequences of different strategies or approaches could be in their life as they approach major decisions. For younger people, it's really very interesting because for them, they're just starting out. And so what we see is important is that you really have to think about what are the new experiences that you need to expose them to so that they begin to take on more responsibility over time, that they may be part of their IEP meeting starting at age 15, 16, or 17. And so therefore, rather than the professionals around them talking to them about what things will happen to them, the professionals begin to talk to them about what options are available, what activities they could be involved in, and which ones fit best with who they are and what they want to achieve in their life now and in the future.
How can a person get their rights restored?
I'm not a lawyer, so I haven't helped somebody legally go to court and get their rights restored, but I have helped people get connected with lawyers that can help them do that, whether it's through the court or through setting up alternative supports. And sometimes it happens in stages. So I've helped people maybe reestablish some financial independence, certainly some legal independence, and also recognize that because they might have a partial guardianship, understanding the terms of their guardianship so that if it is kind of a process, they can go back to court over stages and have rights and responsibilities restored to them.
The requirement for a guardianship is necessity. So if the necessity no longer exists, in other words, the supports have come together in the community or with that particular person, so there's no longer a necessity for it, then you need to petition to have that guardianship terminated, in my opinion. And I'm thinking for my court, I have equal numbers of establishing guardianships for developmentally disabled as discharging.
I work for the ARC of Midland, and we're an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so just as a rule, we have the position that every person is a citizen in the community and every person should have opportunities and have the ability to contribute as citizens. Part of that is not having your civil rights removed, which is what guardianship can do, right? What guardianship does do. There are certain rights that you have that are given to someone else to exercise on your behalf. And so we've been strong advocates always for alternatives to guardianship. And we happen to have a probate judge who also sees guardianship as a very serious issue. When she imposes a guardianship on someone, she knows she's taking some of their rights.
A story that Jan Lampman likes to tell of a petition for guardianship that was filed on a developmentally disabled person, and they were having problems with economics and also relationships. And Jan was there in a supportive position. I pulled her up on the stand and I said, so we have this petition. Do you feel that it's necessary? And her answer was very good. She said, well, I have relationship issues too, and I have financial issues too. So that cannot be the sole basis that we have a petition for a plenary guardianship. It needs to go to the heart of protection of the individual.
With respect to terminating guardianships, my philosophy is just don't go there in the first place. Again, my emphasis is of working with the school system when families are young and throughout their time in a public school setting, and with the educators that are working with them, be it the teachers, auxiliary staff. Let's just assume that this person's going to be as autonomous as possible. Let's take a look from the get-go, from they're little, about what is it to be self-determined, self-advocate, specific to the age too. So for little ones, they should be able to choose what color toothbrush they might want or what shirt to wear. And if it doesn't match, hey, what's the terrible thing about that?
Why is autonomy important?
People naturally want to be in charge of what goes on within their lives. Most of us would like to have some control. We like to take the responsibility, but with that responsibility also comes the authority to make some decisions. And so with the help of those individuals that love and know them, the autonomy gives people with intellectual and developmental disabilities an opportunity to be the person that they really want to be.
It's important to retain autonomy because autonomy is a fundamental human right, and it's part of what makes us all human. It's part of the inalienable rights that we have for ourselves and the rights that belong to people with disabilities alongside everyone else.
There have been years and years of studies that have shown that people with disabilities who have greater self-determination in their lives have better life outcomes. And that means they're actors in their own lives. They're not being acted upon, they're acting for themselves. They're more likely to be successfully employed. They're more likely to make that difficult transition into adulthood that happens when you leave school. They're going to be healthier, and I'm not only talking about psychological health, physically healthier. And so I think we need to take that very seriously, that promoting self-determination, regardless of what tool you use to support decision-making, needs to be the fundamental goal because people live better lives.
people retaining autonomy in their life is really part of a safeguard strategy. So that if you look at the data that has emerged over the last 20 years, as we've started really tracking outcomes in people's lives, you find that when people are in more control of their lives, they feel more comfortable saying no, so that they're less likely to be pushed into doing something that they don't want to do. We also find that people are more connected to other people. For example, people rely on different folks in their larger social network to help them make decisions. They're actually going to people to get that advice prior to finding themselves in a bad decision. So they're comfortable going to people and asking for input rather than thinking they've got to do it all on their own. And again, that's another sort of safeguard that enables people to learn over time, as well as potentially avoid bad outcomes in their lives.
What supported decision-making tools can people with IDD use?
The best tool is listening to the person. I think that as we listen to individuals to determine what they would like to have happen to them, happen with them, to have the life that they want to live, we can use whatever tools are available to assist. I think that's where we really need to be mindful, because every individual is just that, an individual.
My life now, all right, can make my own decisions now. Went to high school, graduated, went to special education, living out in the community. Now I'm living into a home, a house. I drive my own vehicle. I'm on like 2 or 3 boards and involved in the city of Westland as a disability concern board, as a chairperson on that board. The tools that I use is my own guardian, for example. If I want to go make a payment on a bill, make a payment, or the decisions like going to see my doctor, for example, or making the decision to go out to a library. I think it's important for people to have that time for decision making. It's about their life if they want to live a self-determined life.
You need to take an approach that is very person-centered. You need to decide what tool for the person is going to be the least restrictive for whatever the situation is.
Parents are made to feel that they need to rush into these decisions. They do not. Slow down, make sure you understand all that's at stake here, understand what the alternatives are, all the supports that are out there.
All of us make mistakes, and so we can't hold individuals with disabilities to a different standard and say that they can't make decisions because they may make a mistake.
When we turn 18, we are legally able to make decisions, and that ability to have the self-worth, the knowledge, the self-respect to know that you are capable and respected as an individual who is independent and able to make decisions. People with disabilities want that same respect. With supported decision-making, we are really honoring that value of maintaining an individual's autonomy and respecting their adulthood.
Using the principles of self-determination to make those kind of decisions, and using your circle to make sound decisions, because everybody deserves to take risks at some point in their life. Everybody has made mistakes, and nobody perfect, and no man is an island. So let's go for it in the most effective way we can and support people in making sound decisions. So they won't get stuck in the system and get caught up in the legalese of having guardians when they really don't have to have guardians, or somebody get controlling their life other than themselves.
People have a hard time thinking about their life in a different way when you've always been put in the box and told this is what your life is and how it can be, and then someone else comes along and says, but what do you really want? And maybe it could be this way. Getting people to hear me at times and understand when it pertains to my own life that what I'm saying is really what I mean, and when I want something to happen in my life, it doesn't mean maybe, it doesn't mean that possibly I want it to happen. It means really this is what we're going to work on, and really this is where I want to go in life. This is why I really wanted to do this, because yes, I am making a choice, and yes, I know that I have to work on it, and I'm willing to do the work. Please listen and please hear that when we ask for something, we want to be heard.
Okay, so I'm going to unshare my screen. And Caitlin is going to bring up the PowerPoint presentation. If you just go back one slide while we have a short discussion. So I want to start with a little bit of discussion with the group. Thoughts about the video? And as people are either raising their hand, Caitlin and Vicki are going to be watching the chat as well, so you could put a comment in the chat or raise your hand, and Caitlin will handle helping you unmute, so you can make a comment regarding the video. So while we give you a few minutes to do that, a couple comments about the video. It is, we did have it professionally done, and it is available to you if you want to use it as a tool in teaching others or talking to others about supported decision making. What we can do is send it to you on a jump drive. It is, unfortunately, it takes up too much memory to allow me to attach it to an email and send it out. But if you're interested, at the very end of the presentation, I'll be sharing my email address. Both presenters' emails will be on the screen. So if you contact me and indicate that you'd like a copy of the video, I can get that to you via jump drive. It'll be in the old-fashioned snail mail way of mailing it out to you. All right, so Caitlin, comments about the video? I do see a couple of hands raised.
Yep, so let's start with Amy. Amy, you have your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
I just wanted to say that the PowerPoint and the video was extremely good and very informative, and thank you, Mary, for showing it to us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Again, it is owned by the citizens of Michigan, so you know, if you'd like a copy, we can get those out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for Amy. Other comments or questions?
Yep, so Shannon says in the chat here, the video was very informative. I see some actions I need to correct immediately, such as conversations about POA versus guardianship.
Okay. So again, it is kind of a short and abridged 18-minute version. It's a nice tool that people can use. Teachers can, you know, if receiving a question from a family about guardianship when they're talking about that transfer of rights, it's, you know, a nice thing that you could send home. A case manager could use it in discussing what supported decision making is with the family. Again, it's kind of short and sweet, something that could be shown as part of a meeting. Anything else?
Mary, this is Vicki, and you know, I've seen it a couple of different times, and each time I'm just, you know, I hear and I learn something new, and I just really appreciate in that video the varying perspectives, the different types of people talking, individuals that have had guardianship, persons with disabilities, families, teachers, you know, so it gives you a well-rounded, and I really like some of the definitions and how they describe what guardianship can and can't do to a person.
Right. I kind of feel the same way. I've seen it what seems like 1,000 times and previewed it, and you know, when they were the production company was splicing it together, and every time I see it, you know, a little bit different perspective comes out, and so I like it for that reason. The council is considering doing a second video with more family members, and really kind of working toward getting tools and resources for individuals with higher and more complex needs, because we want people to understand that supported decision making is for everyone. So COVID's put us a little bit behind because the production company can't travel around the state as much and film individuals, but look for that in the future. This video is also housed on the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council website. We're going to go through that at the end of the presentation And so know that if you're not interested in getting one necessarily in the snail mail, but later on you think, oh gosh, I'd like to show that video to somebody, they can access it through the DD Council's webpage. Okay, any other comments before we move on to the next slide?
We do have one more comment from Janet. She says, surprising that teachers are the first to recommend this. We need to change that. And then I also have a hand up. I believe it was Cooper that has your hand up, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I just wanted to comment also, I thought the film was very well done. I thought it represented people that could really speak for themselves very well, and I'm glad you mentioned that second video that was maybe in progress, because I found myself wondering about the very fine line that we face when individuals are not able to clearly speak for themselves. And that raises some definite issues about guardianship or no guardianship, and what's their world like for supported decision making, and what's the right balance between family and trusting the mental health system, particularly if there is no family.
Right.
So that I'm just throwing that out as a challenge to look at when you're looking at individuals that are less capable of really representing themselves.
Absolutely, and that's a good conversation to have, and I can share more information about that as the presentation moves on. So in the video, you saw the individual who was at therapeutic horseback riding, and her name is Liz, and she's an individual that I worked with years ago from the Ann Arbor area, who is somebody who doesn't speak verbally. She does on rare occasions, usually when she's really angry, and one or two words come out, and they're usually words you're not really interested in hearing. But for the most part, she doesn't speak. So, her life with supported decision making has been different than other individuals who can say, this is what I want, here's my choice, I'm expressing my choice. But part of supported decision making is surrounding people with that circle of support, whether it's family or people outside the family, such as in my brother's case. I'm not biologically related to him. I started out being a circle of support for him, and we've become like family. He will introduce me often as his sister, and I often talk about my brother because that's the relationship we have, and that's the relationship he has with my entire family. So, he again is able to speak verbally, but is just a man of few words. He chooses not to speak to most people, but it's getting to know the individual and pulling those people that are close enough to know what their communication means, what their body language means, and all of that. And that's how that worked for Liz, and that's how that can work for many other people who don't either have English as their primary language and speak in another language, or speak using sign language, or speak or communicate, I should say, using behavior. And so that's something we want to showcase a little bit more, so, in our next video. So we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. So Caitlin, if you'd like to go on to the next slide. Thank you for all of those comments.
Thank you.
I do want to speak just briefly before we do this slide, the comment that was made about it's surprising that this often happens, the first conversation often happens in schools. And the reason for that is in an IEP process, as a student's getting close to that age of majority, 18 in Michigan, that conversation, there's actually IEP paperwork that schools are required to note whether the discussion of that transfer of rights has happened. So when a student turns 18, and as most of you know in Michigan, a student that is in special education can continue that free and appropriate education up to the age of 26. So we have 18 to 26-year-olds who are legal adults because they're over the age of 18, and that the school is responsible for notifying the family that as they turn 18, they are a legal adult and can make decisions about their education. But the big fear is that families will no longer be able to be involved in their education, when a simple release of information could be signed by a young student, 16, 17 years of age, that says, I would like my parents to continue to be involved in my education process. I want them to attend my IEPs. If not parents, it could be some other designated person from their circle of support. And so there's ways to do that without guardianship. But for years in Michigan and in other states in the nation, the guardianship's the only thing that we've ever talked about. Guardianship dates back to Roman, Roman times, when Rome reigned supreme in the world. And, we've just continued it on generation, century after century. And I hope you'll see from the rest of the presentation that that's no longer the case, because there's such little information out there about what guardianship actually is and what it actually does. And so this slide is information from a parent. So in that situation, they have a young child who's, 16, they're starting to think about what do we do after school? What do I want my life to be like after school? And here was their comment when asked about, what do you think about guardianship? One word, overwhelmed. This is the best term to describe how I felt for several years, especially after my son turned 16. Once 16, and from then on, we were continually asked, what are your plans when school is done? We couldn't really answer the question. We didn't know or understand our options. It wasn't enough to hear about agencies and services just one time. The systems are so different from the school and are very confusing. So too much information at once and not really understanding what to do with it. This thing called guardianship. Not sure what to think. Some of our friends are having a guardian appointed, some are not. My son is almost 18. We need help. And that's kind of that situation that families are in. And so it's this awkward situation of, think about it for a moment. Guardianship. Well, it's what everyone else is doing. Is that a reason for it? No, definitely not. So if you could go on to the next slide. Then there's the teacher's experience. And again, this kind of points to that earlier comment about surprising that this happens in school, and it all has to do with that transfer of rights. And in most school districts, the paperwork even says, have you discussed with the family guardianship? It doesn't say, have you discussed with the family how the student will make decisions as an adult? It doesn't discuss supported decision-making or any other thing. But as we get presentations out to more school districts, some of them are changing the wording on that paperwork to help teachers to feel more comfortable with explaining the myriad of options that are there other than just guardianship. So Bonnie, do you want me to keep going, or you want to take the teacher's experience?
You can keep going.
Okay, so this was the comment from a teacher. When a father came to our school, he was under the impression that he was the guardian of his adult son because his son had a disability. So at that point, when I asked him for guardianship papers, he was like, well, what do you mean? I don't know what those are. I'm his guardian though, right? Immediately, he wanted to know how to get guardianship. What an awkward position for a teacher to be in. Too many parents don't know the advantages or actually the disadvantages of guardianship. They want a resource to contact and find out if they really want a guardianship. I think a lot of them don't know about it. They don't know they need to go to court. They don't know if they should or shouldn't. I'm unsure what to say. I never had any of this prep. I'm a teacher, not a lawyer. So that's kind of the position that teachers are put in. And it's a really awkward position. So again, that's why we want these presentations to be out there. So everyone that works with or is in a family with or is a person with an intellectual or developmental disability has the same information and knows all the resources that are out there that can help them, not just guardianship. But for many years in Michigan, and you'll see in other states how we compare to other states nationally, that guardianship is the only thing that's ever been talked about. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to let Bonnie take it away. So you've heard a parent's experience, a teacher's experience. Let's hear about the experience of one person that has lived this experience of guardianship.
So I just want to start out by saying, first and foremost, that this is just one experience, right? Everyone has their own experience when it comes to this and any other topic. So I think that one of the key things to point out is that I wasn't always a strong advocate. That was a skill that I had to build, and it came because of the situation that I'm going to share with you now. So are we using the terms transition age? So when I was getting ready to leave school, and even much younger than that, I was always told about all the things I couldn't do or would never do. And that sort of talk just didn't compute to me. It didn't make sense because I would hear people saying different things I couldn't do or would never do, and no one was really asking me if I even had what my interests were. But I knew what I wanted, and no one was asking me, but they definitely had ideas about what my capabilities and my future should be, and they didn't align with anything that I wanted for myself. So in short, what people's ideas for me were for me to not work, not go to college, not have a job. I already said that. Just and so, but those were all things that I wanted, and furthermore, quite possibly live in a group home. And I'm not saying that any of those things are wrong for people that do need those supports starting out. But I didn't want the supports. I wanted to live on my own. I wanted the college experience, and I wanted to have a career. And the people in my life at the time were just like, oh, no, that's going to be too hard. That's not going to be for you. You're going to be on disability, and that's going to be what you do. And I just, those weren't things that I wanted. So that, it just made life really hard for me because I felt like I was fighting against everyone to have the life that I wanted. And when you do that, instead of having people in your corner, you tend to make a lot of mistakes. Never mind that that's what you do at that age anyway. You make a lot of mistakes. So when you don't have people in your corner, those mistakes, I think, are a lot bigger than they have to be. I wasn't making the best of decisions along the way, but then when I had that, I did go live in my own apartment versus a group home, but all the other things that I wanted to go along with it were bigger struggles. It's a lot harder. I've found it's a lot harder for me to do some things that I want to do because I do need those supports. And so for those people that were constantly saying, oh no, you can't do that, it wasn't that I couldn't do that, it was that I could do that, but I was going to need some supports along the way. That was the conversation that we needed to have, instead of, no, you can't do that. And since I didn't have the supports along the way, it made a lot of stops and starts in my life. And then sort of when my mom passed away, even though I didn't live with her, people in it's kind of hard to say that they were in my life because they really weren't, but they all of a sudden popped up and were like, oh, we forgot about Bonnie. What do we do with her? And they really didn't need to do anything because I was already living my life, maybe not to their expectation and not even to my expectation yet, but I was still living my life. And then they said, well, we need to make sure that she's safe. I guess that was their goal. So they thought guardianship was the way to go. And I was like, oh no, life isn't quite right yet, but we're not doing that. So I took off to Mexico because I knew that was a definite possibility. Other things in my life hadn't gone quite right, and I didn't want to have to fight with my family over my rights and then have that be a losing battle where I definitely wasn't going to have an opportunity to see my dreams come true.
You ready for the next slide?
Yes, I am. So now, now I have this completely other life that I didn't even expect. It's way different than what my expectations were, because while I wanted my own life, I wasn't thinking back then, well, I'm going to be this advocate for myself or let alone other people. Now I chair the DD Council. Not only do I not live in a group home, but I own my own home. I'm employed full time. I have now, a healthy relationship. And because, I try to think of life in more positive terms. So in one way, I'm grateful that things turned out the way that they did, because I went to Mexico and now I get to use those lived experiences to help others because I speak Spanish. So I'm really grateful for being able to have the abilities that I do and the experiences that I did to be able to turn them around and use them now to help others. But I think it's much better for people to be able to have what they need without all the extra roadblocks in between.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. Let's go ahead on to the next slide while Caitlin is progressing on. Are there any comments or hands raised at this point? Caitlin or Vicki?
Nope, we did drop in the chat information on how to get the video though, just so you're aware.
Awesome, thank you. So I mentioned earlier, some of these slides we're going to go very quickly through. It's always a focus of mine at a presentation to give opportunities for individuals with lived experience to share their experience with us. So I think that's really important information for others to hear and see how these concepts that we're talking about kind of come to life in one person's world. So we want you to also know the statistics on this. So this is information taken from the National Core Indicators. It's dating back to 2013-14 up until 2017 and 18. So you can see at the bar graph at the left, guardianships, over 70% of the people that were interviewed for National Core Indicators had either full or plenary guardianships. And then you can see over years from 2013 to 2018, that showed a steady increase. And you have to ask yourself, why? Is it because it's the only thing we've ever known in Michigan? Because information's not out there about other resources? What's really telling on this particular graphic is this bar at the far right. That shows on a national average where we were at. So when Michigan is above 70% of guardianship for people that were interviewed for the National Core Indicators, other states are only at like 43. So we're going to go on to the next slide. It shows that a little more dramatically. So again, these are figures taken from National Core Indicators. When you think of the nation as a whole, well, Michigan was at 81% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and or mental illness who were evaluated by the National Core Indicators, 81% had a guardian, either partial or full plenary guardianship, when the national average is only 43%. So we have more guardianships in Michigan than is the national average, significantly so. So again, that's part of why the council has created, you know, their initiative and collaborated with other organizations such as Oakland Community Health Network and Detroit Wayne Integrated Health to get this message out to people. Next slide. So guardianship, I see we have a hand raised, so we're going to go through this one slide and then we'll answer your question. It looks like Nancy. So we want people to understand, because a lot don't, about the process of guardianship. Many of those families that we've talked about, like in the school setting, weren't really given information and didn't understand the process of guardianship and what it does. It is a legal process. Bonnie, do you want to go over the flow chart very quickly?
Sure. Well, I can't, because I can't see all of the.
Okay.
The top.
Let me do that then. So in a guardianship situation, a petition's filed. So just because a person has an intellectual or developmental disability doesn't mean that when they turn 18, the parents automatically become guardian of that person. It is a legal process. So in the scenario we talked about earlier, that family member didn't even realize that, you know, there was a legal process to guardianship. And guardianship is legally removing some or all of a person's civil rights. That's legally what happens in a guardianship hearing. So a petition's filed. It has to be adjoined or accompanied by an evaluation report and a physical health statement. So then either a temporary guardianship is granted or denied. So temporary, a judge will say, well, you know, this needs to come before court. We need to hear from all sides, but there's enough evidence in this petition that I'm going to grant a temporary guardianship. Or they'll say there is not enough evidence here that I'm even going to schedule a hearing and deny. I will tell you that most petitions filed for upon people that have intellectual or developmental disabilities are granted by judges. So then there's a date of a hearing, the notice of hearing sent out to the parties. It's sent out to the alleged ward, the person who's the center of the petition, and other parties. Now, if the court isn't aware of who the other parties in this person's circle of support are, they don't know to send that to them. So for example, when at one point somebody felt my brother needed a petition, you know, filed a petition for guardianship, they had no idea that there are 27 Sheeans all willing and able to surround him with whatever supports he needs. We never got that notice. It was by total happenstance that we found out that there was a petition, and then, you know, we start calling and we get the information out there, and so they ended up canceling the hearing, and my brother remains an autonomous adult today. But how quickly this can happen, and for many of us who have been to guardianship hearings, I've seen them that last 5 minutes or less, with the person who's supposed to represent that individual in court, their lawyer, meeting them 5 minutes before they walk in the courtroom. So this is not a person who's really there to defend this person's right, to talk about anything other than how quickly we can get the guardianship petition granted. So there's an appointment of an attorney for the alleged ward, there's a hearing and a court determination. Again, they're often very short. So during that hearing, then either the petition is dismissed, a full plenary guardianship is given, or a partial guardianship is given. And another piece that people don't know is that when you are a guardian for somebody, you have to file annual reports. And that's continued until the termination of the guardianship. If it's a full plenary guardianship, that is not continually challenged. If it's a partial or a plenary guardianship, it's reviewed every 5 years. But those annual reports are still due every year. So next slide, if you would. So before we talk a little bit more about that, I'd like to answer Nancy's question.
I guess I don't really have a question so much as I guess I'm surprised and conflicted over the state of Michigan and how, you know, the percentage of guardianships that we have, considering the fact that OCHN and the ARC and, you know, the Wayne State Developmental Disability Institute, everybody since 1998 has been talking about self-determination, and we've seen self-determination be more well-defined as the years have gone on. But then when the conflict comes in that, you know, I have a son who's 40 and he's his own, you know, guardian, and it's been great until we hit the medical field. And that's when things can get really scary. And so I wonder if that has anything to do in the state of Michigan, why the guardianships are so high. I guess that's my concern.
It can be one of the factors, but we're going to talk a little later on in the presentation how to deal with some of those medical concerns and less restrictive things that can, supports that can be put in place to help people with those medical decisions. And I can share some examples from, you know, my brother's story as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Any other hand raised or questions in the chat before we move on to the types of guardianship?
There is not at this time.
Okay, so there's different types of guardianship. Guardianship of the person, guardianship of the state, conservatorship, and that term usually is referred to a guardianship for a person who is a senior, I'm looking for the term I want to use, senior citizen. And so there are two laws in Michigan, one that pertains to guardianship for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that's governed under the Mental Health Code. And guardianship for seniors is under a law called EPIC. And so these, you know, it could be over the person where somebody would have decision-making power over medical issues, maybe programs that this person or school was going to partake in, or the estate, which would mean the property of and the finances of that person. Scope of guardianship could be full or total or partial or limited. So a guardianship removes all or some of a person's civil rights in a particular area. Or it could be a combination thereof. We've seen, you saw on the video one judge, Judge Allen from Midland area, and you know, her perspective on this is very different than most judges, and it can vary greatly from county to county, as Nancy brought up. How is this happening in Michigan? There are some counties that, if we look just at and isolate just their data, that are making progress at decreasing guardianships, whereas others, it's still continuing to increase. So again, we want to target our education and hit those areas that are lacking information as well. Next slide. We've got about a half an hour left, Bonnie, so I'm just doing a time check. So the person's rights that could be in jeopardy with a guardian are deciding where to live, consenting and preventing any medical or health care or treatment, determining when and how to travel, spending money. I remember before I was more involved with my brother, he had the option of having money that he had earned at his job in his pocket, as long as it wasn't over $2. So think about a grown man, and that's all the money that he's earned that he has access to at any time. And, you know, oftentimes guardianship comes with building into the person's thinking that they don't have a right to things or that they can't control things. Still to this day, I'm 58 years old. My brother's about a year and a half older than I am. And when we go on vacation, he'll say, here's my money, and want to hand me an envelope. And I'm like, well, if it's your money, why are you handing it to me? And, you know, so it's that kind of thing that guardianship can come with things you don't expect. So instead of protecting the individual, it's really acting in a sense of limiting that individual from thinking for themselves and making decisions, because it's like a learned helplessness kind of thing. That it could be rights could put in jeopardy their ability to make decisions about educational or vocational programs, participating in legal issues, contracts, or filing lawsuits, or buying or selling property. Giving permission to have a picture taken and shown for publicity purposes. One thing I want to mention, we wanted to make sure this information really got out there, particularly this year, was that even though somebody has a guardian, they still retain the right to vote in Michigan. And that's not true in every state, but that is true in Michigan. Okay, next slide.
Can I add just one thing about the legal issues?
Absolutely.
So, this can get tricky. Like, I wanted to share the incident that we were discussing in the advisory committee. Sometimes the guardians are not always someone that a family member. Sometimes I think that is assumed, and sometimes we'll talk more about this later in the presentation. Sometimes the guardians are public, and so they can be the guardian of more than one person, and that could create a conflict if they have legal issues against each other. And so I just want to so that could be not fair to one person or the other, where the guardian is refusing to press charges on behalf of another person that deserves to have their rights stood up for.
Right. So in a case of a domestic violence situation, the guardian was saying, well, both people have disabilities, so it's not, it doesn't warrant a court case. It doesn't warrant filing charges. When somebody was physically assaulted, the person saying they want to press charges and the guardian saying, no, let's not do that. So, I mean, think about that from the perspective of everything you see in the news about assault and sexual assault, and what message that sends to people with disabilities about the importance of their decision making and the importance of them owning their own body and making decisions about what happens to their body. So we've mentioned this word a few times, supported decision making. So what is it? Basically, we all need supports, helpers, and consultants in our lives in order to make good decisions, whether we have a disability or not. And I think if you thought for a minute, who is in your circle of supports? I mean, you know, we're coming up on tax season soon, and many of us use financial consultants to help us do our taxes. It really is no different for people with disabilities. And as Bonnie said, the perception that she needed support in certain areas doesn't mean that she needs support in every area, or that she can't make decisions if she's educated on all her choices and that she can't express those decisions. But oftentimes for people with disabilities, we look at that as different than the way we look at ourselves. If I'm going to buy a new car, I don't know much about cars. They have 4 wheels, they have one to steer, I know that. You know, I could change an oil in a tire, but I don't want to. So when I go to buy a car or I get my car worked on, I call my circle of support. I have a brother, I have a son who's 24, and they know a lot about cars. So I ask them, how much did this cost? What do you think's really going on here? So they're in my circle of support. So really supported decision making is just normalizing that situation for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, helping them surround themselves with a group of people they know and trust and can go to for advice. So in short, that's what supported decision making is. Next slide. So the difference between supported decision making and guardianship is a substitute decision making situation. The guardian is in the position of making the decisions for the person. It limits their rights, it limits their choices, and it limits their freedom. Supported decision making, however, is that process that enables people with disabilities to retain and exercise their rights and make and communicate choices in regard to personal and legal matters. It doesn't mean they don't still get advice from other people. It doesn't mean that they might not choose to appoint somebody else to make decisions in a particular area. My brother does not like to make decisions about money because he's been told that for so many years. He does have a payee, and he wants a payee. He can choose who that payee is. He can develop a relationship with someone that he feels comfortable, has the same desires that he has for how he wants his money spent. And he can say, I am asking you to help me make decisions in this area. But that's different than having somebody else appoint a person he doesn't even know. And that often happens, as Bonnie pointed out, in a public guardian situation. Next slide. So the main concerns why people think somebody might need a guardian are the education, which we've mentioned earlier when that transfer of rights happens. Safety is a big thing that's brought out. Medical decisions, finances, communication, and as Nancy, I think it was Nancy or maybe Cooper that brought it up earlier. If somebody has a difficult time communicating in English by speaking their choices, and we have to put some resources or tools in place to help them communicate in other ways, that's another main reason. Sexuality and people's myths and misperceptions about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as not being sexual human beings. So a lot of times guardians are thought of in that regard, or for legal matters like signing contracts, signing a lease, marriage license, all those kind of things. Next slide. Do you want to start these, Bonnie, or you want me to keep going?
I can go. So
okay,
circles of support are just what they sound like. They're made up of family and friends and can also include teachers, employers, caregivers, coworkers, community members, organizations, and sometimes even paid staff. So as Mary was saying earlier, we all need different people in our circles to help us succeed in life. I bet if you stop and think about a certain situation in your life, you can think of at least one person you would consider in your circle for that particular need. I won't ask you to share because of time.
Okay. Next slide.
So, do you want me to take this one, Mary?
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay. So, assistive technology can also make decision making easier and help people live more independently. These are just a few examples, and some of them you utilize. Some of them include medication management devices, GPS technology, virtual assistants like Alexa, and remote monitoring and environmental controls.
So I think if people think for a moment in their own lives, a lot of these tools that can be used in supported decision making are tools we use all the time. And over the next few months, we're going to break each of these tools down and talk more about them and give more examples of them in individual presentations. So we're on person-centered planning. Do you want me to go from here for a bit?
Sure.
Okay, so person-centered planning is a way for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to plan their lives. It builds on their strengths and honors their choices, their preferences, and their abilities. And it's important to know it's required by state and federal law for people who receive behavioral health services that the services and supports they receive are supposed to be provided based on person-centered planning. So we're going to have a whole presentation just on that topic. So we're listing these as tools, and then we're going to describe them more thoroughly in the following month's presentations. Next slide. Self-determination means making your own choices, learning to solve problems, taking control and responsibility for your own life. People who are self-determined make decisions happen in their own, make things happen in their own lives. They know what they want and how to get it. They choose and set goals, then work to reach them. They advocate on their own behalf and are involved in solving problems and making decisions about their lives. Notice that last line. They're solving problems and involved in solving problems and making decisions about their own lives. We would never make a decision in my brother's life without him being at the center of that. And oftentimes that's a little different in a guardianship situation. The guardian just makes decisions and the individual isn't always consulted on them, particularly in the case of public guardians. Over my 30-some year career in working in the field of rehabilitation in Michigan, I've had situations where guardians called me and said, hey, it's about time for their annual report. How is he doing? And my response had to be, do you mean she? Like, the guardian had never met the individual. And there is no law in Michigan that requires a guardian to ever have met the person that is their ward. So think about that. If that were you, would you want a total stranger making decisions about your life? Next slide. Release of information forms, as we mentioned with that transfer of rights. When signed by an adult with a disability, release of information forms authorize parents and other allies to access the student's record, medical information, legal proceedings. This helps to ensure quality and continuity of services, care, and enhances the supported decision-making process. Next slide. So again, we're going to talk more about all of these tools. Powers of attorney. So we talked about medical issues. There's power of attorney. There's also medical power of attorney. And then there's durable powers of attorney. For example, when I had surgery a couple years ago and I knew I was going to be unconscious for a couple hours, I knew I wouldn't be able to speak for myself. So as you know, we had that discussion earlier, what if somebody isn't able to speak for themselves? A power of attorney is somebody that you can choose and that you can appoint to make decisions on your behalf, and in the case of a durable, during a specified period of time. So we had quite a lot of fun in my family because I appointed, at the time, he was my 22-year-old son, to be my durable power of attorney while I was unconscious. He thought it was great fun. He's like, Mom, while you're out, I'm going to get your hair dyed. I'm going to, all these things. And I was like, well, just remember, I will come too. And when I do, I still have your timeout chair from when you were a child, and you're not too big to put in it. So it was kind of, that idea that I could choose who it was because I felt like he would make the decisions I would want made. Versus my siblings. I have a whole slew, a whole Irish clan of siblings that I could have chosen, but it was my choice who I wanted to pick, and I picked the person who I thought would make the decisions that best fit what I would make if I could communicate myself at that time. So a power of attorney can be used as a tool. Next slide. Then, as I mentioned, a medical power of attorney to make decisions about medical situations. For example, Liz, shown in the video, never had a guardian. She's always been an autonomous adult. Her parents do have medical power of attorney. She's had major surgeries, never had a problem in the state of Michigan, anywhere where they've gone for medical support, in having that honored. Okay, next slide. Representative payee, I mentioned that. I'm sure you're all familiar with that situation. So for government benefits, that can be managed by a person who that money belongs to has chosen to be their representative payee. Sometimes the Social Security Administration says a person has to have a payee, but then again, they still get the opportunity to choose who that is. That's a process we're going through with my brother right now. He currently has a payee that's an employee of the CMH that he gets supports from. They're changing that process. He's decided he now wants a family member. So we're putting a meeting together so he can talk about all of his options, and if he's not understanding all of his options, he's at all these people that he knows and trusts and spends lots of time with him to discuss those options for him, lay them out, and let him make the choice of who he wants that to be. And then we'll help him file the paperwork to do that. Next slide. Other financial supports are available. Informal supports, and we're going to talk about this in one of the future presentations. Joint accounts, bill paying services, automatic payment withdrawals, and fiscal intermediaries can all be used to help when there's a lot of paperwork that somebody might not understand or need some support on. I mean, when I think of financial paperwork, I was just talking to my son last night about his retirement fund, and I hold a master's degree, so reasonably I can read the information. Do I understand absolutely everything in there? Not exactly. So we call in more people from our circle of support and ask questions. Again, I mentioned taxes. That's a big one. Many of us use support to handle our finances. We just don't always think about that as part of our support. We just think it's what people do. You hire a tax consultant or, you know, somebody else, an attorney, to handle situations for you that you think they have an expertise in and you trust. Next slide. There's special needs trust. They can be individual or pooled. There's ABLE accounts, ways to help people manage their money so that they can have the life of their choosing and still, you know, receive benefits and still, you know, work in the community or wherever they choose to work. So there's lots of tools besides a guardianship that can help people manage medical issues, that can help them manage financial issues. Next slide. So basically with supported decision making, there's 5 steps. One is starting that conversation. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Identifying who is willing and able to assist, plan and communicate, set up the agreement, and then making sure everybody knows that agreement. And in future trainings, we'll talk about how that looks in people's lives. In that experience, it was really important to let everybody know. My brother has a patient advocate, and that's somebody outside the family that attends the church that he attends, that he's very close to and knows about medical information. And so we need to communicate that and make sure that both hospitals in our local area have that on record, so they know that if he ends up in the emergency room and perhaps isn't able to communicate clearly what's going on with him, there's a patient advocate that will be called. Next slide. So this is just one of many, 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 many tools that can be used. It is something that we are a life course state, so this opportunity to use life course and their materials and the technical assistance to do that is available here in Michigan. So life course, you know, it has just actual hard copy tools that can be used, ways of helping you think about supported decision making. At the Family Summit in May, you'll have opportunities to hear from the creators of the life course, and they're going to go through this whole process. So these are just 2 of the forms. If you look at the websites on the left, you can get these in the Michigan DD Council website or also lifecoursetools.com. I'll ask Caitlin to go ahead and put those in the chat box. And again, it's just a process that you can go through, knowing to ask the right questions, thinking about, is this a natural support, something that's going to be a paid support, or something that's going to come from a circle. So all those things are available. We just don't often think about that for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We just know the way it's always been done, particularly in Michigan, is you just get a guardian. And there are many, many other tools that are less intrusive, less restrictive, and not removing people's rights. Next slide. You want to take this one, Bonnie?
Yes. So this is a quote from the TASH organization in 2017. We all make decisions, big and small, every day. We may take them for granted, and we have the right to exercise such autonomy over our lives, and that we often have a network of trusted friends and allies with whom we consult to make the important decisions that affect our lives. This is not always the case for people with disabilities.
Okay, next slide.
The National Guardianship Association has this to say about guardianship and supported decision making. Supported decision making should be considered before guardianship, and the supported decision making process should be incorporated as part of the guardianship if guardianship is necessary.
So even the National Guardianship Association is saying we should be thinking about supported decision making before guardianship. What does that say to you if their national organization of guardians is saying, you know, you've missed a step if you've gotten to us and you haven't thought about supported decision making first? Next slide. So guardianships. Again, this is from Mental Health Michigan Compiled Law Chapter 6. shall be considered or shall be utilized only as necessary to promote and protect the well-being of the individual. Not because it's convenient, but only necessary to promote and protect the well-being of the individual, and shall be designed to encourage the development of maximum self-reliance and autonomy in the individual. So again, the law says that even if a guardianship is used, the guardianship should be designed in a way that helps to maximize that person's self-reliance and autonomy. And that's not how it functions in our state and in many states in the union. Guardianships become sort of this learned helplessness situation. I don't need to make any decisions because my guardian's going to decide. Exactly. Or why bother to dispute it because they're just going to take over anyways, and they have the legal right to do so.
Can I add something, Mary?
Absolutely.
So, oh, I just lost my train of thought. So, one thing is that, yes, some people with disabilities have a harder time making decisions, but part of that is because they've never been encouraged to or allowed to make decisions. So they haven't learned how to make those decisions. So as the months go on and more of these conversations are had, hopefully you'll be having discussions around how to encourage those conversations around specifically the different tools that Mary discussed in regards to legal and medical and financial just decision making. And so that people can learn how to make those decisions with more confidence and more self-reliance. That doesn't mean that they won't need some sort of support, because everybody does need support at some point, as we've tried to demonstrate in this presentation today.
Thank you. And next slide. So before thinking of guardianship, ask these questions. Why guardianship? What is the guardianship really going to do that couldn't be covered or supported in another way? Have you exhausted less intrusive and restrictive options? And have we effectively and sufficiently tried those alternatives? Would guardianship really address the issue? So for example, we have situations in Michigan where people say, well, they need a guardian because, of relationship issues. And then you see on the video, Judge Allen, playing off of Jan Lampman, both in the Midland area, Jan going on the stand and saying, well, I have relationship issues too. That doesn't mean I have a guardian. I mean, how many of us know of somebody in our life that we think makes poor decisions about relationships? I think if I could see you all on the screen, I'd see a lot of hands raised. Not necessarily all those people are people with disabilities. I have some friends who continually are dating the same wrong person because they keep doing the same, they keep choosing the same type of person over and over and over again, and then expressing what's wrong with that person. And then I think, why are you drawn to people like that? I mean, lots of questions. So lots of us make bad decisions about relationships. Is that something that a guardianship can really address? So in a case where a person who's made some bad relationship decisions and maybe put themselves in danger, how is a guardianship going to control that? Unless the guardian's with that person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that person's still going to be making bad relationship decisions. And typically, when people in our lives try to control us so much that, on an issue that's something that we really want, then we just subvert it. We hide it. We still do it, but we find a way for them not to find out. And that's often what happens in those situations. Next slide. So this is just a graphic to kind of, again, make you think, starting at that most restrictive thing of guardianship, we really want to work toward what's least restrictive. And that's a person making their own decisions as a legal adult. And there's all these steps in between. And for each of these teal square or rectangles that you see, there's 100 levels within each of those. There's 100 levels of how people can make decisions on their own. There's 100 ways or more to do person-centered planning, and it should be individualized to the person. There's hundreds of ways to do informal banking services. There's hundreds of ways to do supported decision-making arrangements. They can be formal, they can be informal. So again, there are thousands of ways between guardianship and a person making their own decision. What you're entrusted with doing if a person is supported by behavioral health in Michigan is to go for that least restrictive way. Next slide. We're coming up on the end of the presentation here. It's 2:25. We've got a few minutes and we want to leave a few extra minutes for questions at the end. So where do we go from here? This is a quote from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And so in Michigan, guardianship's the only thing we've ever known. Now that we know there's some different ways, we really need to think of how to infuse those tools into the system of supports that we have. Next slide. So resources. I said in the beginning that we would share our contact information. If you'd like an actual tangible jump drive with the video on it to share, you have my contact information there, Shan Bogard M at michigan.gov. And then some resources, contacting your local ARC. They are involved in the advisory group. Michigan Alliance for Families is also involved. The map at the right shows where those are located, and their website, which has supported decision-making tools. And then you can also contact the Developmental Disabilities Council. You can ask for me. You can go onto our website. There's a whole section just on supported decision-making. You can view the video again there if you like. Next slide. So again, there's these three websites. Sometimes when we have more time in a presentation, we'll actually kind of peruse these a little bit and give you an opportunity to kind of look at these websites. But again, these will be available to you, and you can access these websites and look for supported decision making. On DD Council's website, kind of scroll down from the picture, there's a woman from the Detroit area that is seen there working. And then below that, you'll see some, I think they're either teal or navy blue bars, and one of them says supported decision making. If you click on that, then there's all the tools, PowerPoints, there's the video. We have our summit from 2018, which was an all-day summit. It's broken up into 3 short videos that you can watch. And on that, you see the speakers are from, next slide. The speakers are from the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making, Morgan Whitlatch and Tina Campanella. So there's lots of resources out there. And throughout the next few months, we're going to be talking about a lot of those. So I'm going to go ahead and do next slide, and then we'll end with questions, because I know Vicki wanted to talk about some opportunities, kind of a wind up, and some opportunities that'll be available to you over the next 9 months. Go ahead, Vicki.
I also did want to say that at sometime in the near future, we will have supported decision-making resources on the OCHN website as well. We're working on that. And additionally, the state supported decision-making work group has put together a subcommittee to develop a toolkit. So many of the tools and the things that you can use for people in supported decision-making, it'll be all put together in a toolkit. It won't happen in a month or two. It'll probably take us a good portion of this year to bring all of that material together and to have really good information. But that is upcoming as well, and I think a toolkit's going to be really beneficial to individuals.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, the things like a 6-page brochure is available on our website, the position statement of the advisory group. So there are some of those tools available that will end up going into a more inclusive toolkit or a more extensive toolkit.
So there also was a question about if they could have a copy of the PowerPoint.
Absolutely. I can send that to you and Caitlin, Vicki, and then you can get that out to whoever is requesting it.
So maybe if individuals want a copy of the toolkit, Caitlin, can you put your email? I mean, not the toolkit, the PowerPoint. Caitlin, could you put your email in the chat?
Yes, I will.
Great. And so you can email Caitlin if you want a copy of the PowerPoint. Again, we've recorded this session and we intend to record all the sessions for the 10th-month series, and we'll be putting that on our website. We should have listed our website on one of the slides, but it's www.oaklandchn.org. So as we go along, we really, again, are looking for a library of these presentations to be on our website. So we're excited about that too. It's taken us a little while to bring this whole training series together, so we don't quite have all of our pieces together yet to get it on the website, but we're working on it. I do want to say that we do have upcoming training. As I mentioned, we got 9 more months to go. Someone asked, is the February training up ready for to register? I don't believe it is yet. We are working on that flyer. We hope to get ourselves in a groove and kind of have that information available a lot further in advance as we go along. But you can see the additional information that we're going to present in the coming months. The times are always the same. When possible in the evening, it could be a live presentation if the trainers are available. Otherwise, Mary will be there as a live person, and then we may also present the recorded portion of the expert who is presenting that particular topic. We've been putting reminders in the chat about CEUs. Let's see, next slide. So Caitlin, do we have the, do we got the survey in the chat yet? So those of you that need social work CEUs and anybody else that's participated, we really ask that you do our survey, our evaluation, so that we can collect information and also improve our presentations in the future. As well as, Mary, you want to talk about why you collect some of that data on the eval?
The part that talks about, you know, age and whether you're a person with IDD or a family member is federal data that we collect. So the Michigan Developmental Disability Council, like its counterpart in every other state, receives federal funds. So we simply need to report to the federal government at the end of each year how many people were reached with a particular initiative. In this case, it's the Supported Decision Making Initiative. So that's how we track how many people attended presentations and got information. Again, I encourage you to fill that out. It does say that it's optional. We obviously aren't going to force you to, but that is helpful information for us to track where we're reaching in Michigan, you know, different types of groups that we're reaching with the information, and areas of the state that we need to hit more often. Whether, you know, there's a disparity with people in rural areas not getting as much information, or urban areas not getting as much information, that helps us determine where we plan and who we collaborate with for our next presentations. So I know there's never enough time to talk about this topic. We're at the end of our time, the presentation is over, but I am willing to stay on for as long as people like to answer questions or comments. And I believe Bonnie is still with us as well. So with that, we'll just open it up for questions.
And I do want to say thank you to Bonnie and Mary. Excellent job. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having us.
Any comments or questions that you have for our trainers? So we're getting some good feedback in the chat. Did somebody have a comment?
Yes, so the email address is shehanbogart@michigan.gov.
Yes, I apologize for the long hyphenated name. So it's SHEHAN without the hyphen, BOOGAARD, my first initial M for Mary, @michigan.gov.
Yeah, I did put it in the chat as well, a couple times, as well as Bonnie's. Yep.
And I just want to double check that everyone has seen the evaluation link and you're able to access that. I'll drop it in one more time just so it's close to the bottom as well.
So when you get to, on the eval, once you get to the ethnicity, you only have Hispanic or Arabic to choose from.
Is it on another page?
Not that mine is showing.
Option for none or other. You can also leave it blank. It should not be required.
It is. There's a red asterisk. It says Arabic, Hispanic, Latino. I don't know my ethnicity. I choose not to tell you.
It should be Caucasian, Asian Pacific Islander.
Seems like maybe something got cut off.
Yeah.
From that.
I can go in and look at that and drop a new one. I can also email it out to all of our participants after as well, just so everyone has that and they're able to get.
And the other option is just to choose one to move on, and we just know that that isn't information that we'll be able to use.
I haven't been able to find the eval.
Okay.
It's in the chat. There's a link. Caitlin's put a link. Caitlin Toth has put a link. So, Sandra, you have your chat open? There, she just popped it in there again.
Yeah, I thought I did, but I still don't see it. I don't know why.
Are you
Sandra? I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was able to open up the evaluation. This is Harriet, but then I lost everybody on the screen. So I need Caitlin's email address sent to me or sent out, because when I fool with it, I lose everybody. I had to go into the meeting.
Harriet, I'll send it to you.
Okay, so I need her email, and it was a great meeting, by the way, since I have the attention of everybody. It was just fabulous. So I appreciate being on.
Thank you. And I know I speak for everybody at Dean and Council. We always appreciate local entities hosting these presentations, and it takes a lot of collaboration back and forth, and sometimes a few things get lost in the middle, like some of the categories for the federal data, but that happens, and we'll figure out a way around that. So again, just thank you to Vicki and Caitlin for managing the chat box and the Q&A. Appreciate that, and I'm always thankful to Bonnie and her willingness to co-present with me on this topic.